I am unashamed. What about you?
So last podcast, we talked about Jase's travels to Georgia, some of his three most interesting people. What about your weekend, Dad? What happened with you? You didn't travel anywhere, but you had your crew.
Yeah, had a little crew. We went up there and we met at university. Some people came in. I had a little note on it. The secretary handed me the note. They were from Bend, Oregon, and a lot of stuff coming out of Oregon in the last few months. And I reminded them of that. I said, I know y'all from Oregon. There's a lot of things coming out of there. I said, but you look and act perfectly normal to me. And they smiled. But it's the first time I've seen, maybe ever, the grandparents, the parents, I think on the son's side, you had the grandparents, the parents, and the grandchild. She was about 14, looked like 15. They all came all the way down here to obey the gospel. The grandparents first, then the parents, and then the little granddaughter.
It's a generational conversion.
It was a generational conversion, and I thought it was one of the coolest things I've seen in a long time.
That's really neat.
I could tell they had somewhere, maybe this podcast, they had sat down and they had listened intently, because I met with them before we baptized them, and then I went over the material, the gospel and everything in it. If you read the book of Romans, you would tend to think, reading the first 3 chapters, that you say, how in the world did this all work? Because the condemnation is on every last human being, and it's always been there. The wages of sin is death. Over here in Colossians, the Apostle Paul, if you read Romans, beginning with Romans 3:23, but now a righteousness from God is revealed. Here's what you look like before Jesus. That's Romans 1, 2, and 3, Al. Mm-hmm. That's pre-Jesus. That's no Jesus. Here's where you end up. Once you come to Jesus, the way he describes it in Colossians, once you were alienated from God and were enemies in your minds, that heart again, because of your evil behavior. But now he has reconciled you by Christ's physical body through death to present you, his doing, not yours. We all violate the law, you die. Well, he presents you, because of what Jesus did on the cross, holy in his sight, without blemish. One of the things the grandfather and the grandmother and the son and the daughter said, Mr. Phil, you just wouldn't believe the sins that we carry, the sins. I said, listen, I understand. Everybody is sinful. Everybody, including y'all, all the way from Oregon. I said, look, in just a few minutes around here, because of your faith in the gospel, I said, not one sin, and I quoted this, you'll be holy in his sight, you'll be without blemish and free from accusation if you continue in your faith, established and firm, not moved from the hope held out in the gospel. Mm-hmm. I quoted that to him, and I said, it's a wonderful, y'all have really, it's your most wonderful day ever. I said, the whole group of you all came down as one. I said, this is what you look like in God's eyes, free from accusation, not one blemish, not one, all gone. So they were extremely happy when they came forth from the waters of baptism and moved on back, took off back to Bend, Oregon.
Well, it's good for us.
Great group.
It's good for us to meet folks. I did the same thing when I was in California a few weeks ago. I mean, there are some great people in states that we sort of assume in the rest of the country, like, because you see some kind of bad things, you're like, oh, that whole state. But there's always good, godly people or people that are searching the city. So I was in Nashville this weekend, at a couple of events. One was the I Am Second premiere, because last week we mentioned that I Am Second has released a new series on their website about our family, because we got some updated information, which I thought you and Mom were fantastic on there. They showed your stuff from a few years ago in Reed's and Jep's too. It's kind of been remastered and done. But I loved the updated stuff because, I don't know, you and Mom were just funny together. They really filmed it in a good way. Of course, I told them what you said. They did a little Q&A after we watched all the things. And it was really emotional because Phyllis was there. And so we watched her, tell her story. And then so she and Lisa and I got up and addressed the people that were there at the event. And I told them what Dad said. I said, well, Dad said on the podcast that when he watched it, he was embarrassed, by your old life, and I told him what I told you back is that's what's so great about it is the gospel takes away shame. And even though we have to sometimes talk about some of our sinful past is to let people know and understand what God has done. But it was really powerful. I loved doing the event. And so that night we had dinner, Jason. We had, I didn't know who he was, but Danny Goki is a singer. And so he and his wife were sitting next to us. And you're
into my world.
Oh, yeah, I know. I told him that. And so he, and then Reed was there too. And so they knew a lot of the same people because Reed is in this video series that's really good. And really powerful because at the time I'd forgotten because Reed was so young when he did. This is like 7 years ago when he did his piece. Well, he was still a really young guy. Now he's grown and married and all that. But his Danny Goki, he was a great, and he was on American Idol. I guess is where he got his start, which I didn't realize that because
that was back when I used to watch American Idol, which is really weird.
Really, he didn't win though, right? He was like.
I think he got
second or third or something like that. Yeah.
But if you finish in the top three, you're fixed to move the needle.
Yeah. And he was telling us about new music he was working on and really interesting. But so his story, he and his wife were on I Am Second. And then there was another guy from a group. Oh man, I've forgotten the name now. Shoot. But anyway, it was an old band that's been around a long time, but they're a country band. And so he's older, but I looked him up because again, I was out of my element. But he and his wife had been on there, so we were kind of all the I Am Second alumni were having dinner together. Some of them, and but his story was amazing too because he and his wife had almost divorced, and then he and his wife told us that somebody got our book to him. I mean, they were about to divorce because he had been unfaithful to his wife, and she had come to the point that she didn't think he could change, and so they read our book and basically said, no, people can change. I mean, if they give it up, if they, give up their sinful heart, their whatever they're, loyal to, Jesus can change you. And he did. And that's the heart of mine and Lisa's story. And of course, our story's on I Am Second too. And, but he told us, he said, you know what, God, that was a divine appointment for us to get that book because it helped us to work on our marriage, and they were holding hands, I mean, it's very fulfilling to me when you know that you put your heart and soul out there for people and you realize that it makes a difference. Next night I was speaking it was an outdoor event, I guess. It was in kind of like a big old barn in Franklin, and it was for a group called Nations University, and it was their donors. But they founded this university 25 years. It's an strictly online university. And, I got to thinking about it when they asked me to speak, because I always, look at the organization and, we kind of tell stories about our family and, of course, about Jesus. But this one, I thought, well, I'm going to do a little research into them. Well, they started an online university back in the 90s. Well, online was just not even a thing. I thought, that's pretty good visionary to say, we think the future of, university is going to be online. So they sent me a video of some of their students around the world. They have probably way more foreign students than they do domestic in the States. And it was basically all these people from all around the world, Africa and, South America. And they were reading Romans 1, 16 and 17. I'm not ashamed of the gospel, but it was just here. I got so inspired because I didn't know what exactly I was going to speak on. And then I watched this video, and that was their deal, be a world changer, of watching these students all around the world. Of course, they were very thankful for their education because most people overseas can't afford anything, so they get their tuition paid for by these donors that I'm speaking to. So it really inspired me for the gospel, and I got fired up. I was just doing my thing. Of course, Kellett was there. He's on their board, and he was like, "Oh, you got pretty fired up." And I was like, "Well, I mean, how can you not be excited about the gospel?" And then you're watching it. And one of the women that really struck me, she was from Portugal, and she was an international journalist. She gave her a little bit of her story, and then she became a believer. Someone introduced Jesus to her. And of course, just the way she was speaking with that accent and everything, she said, "So, I just decided that I needed to fully commit my life to telling his story." And it struck me when I was watching it because, she was probably good at her job. She international journalism, but she decided it was more important to tell the story of Jesus than human stories, which is, journalism is. And sometimes you're impacted by it. But it's kind of what you talked about last time, Jase. It struck me. I thought, no, the story of Jesus is worth committing your whole life to.
Yep.
No matter what else you do.
It's actually true. We're all international Jesus journalists.
That's exactly right.
That's right.
Despite our flaws.
Despite our flaws. We tell the story.
I think that's a problem people have is they think, well, I could never share Jesus because I'm flawed. Because people can always find your flaws.
Right.
But somewhere in God's wisdom, and maybe that goes into what we're talking about, in Romans 4, where God credits righteousness, which is a hard phrase to wrap your head around.
Right.
He's the one providing. In Romans, it just keeps coming up. The righteousness is from God.
I had an instance on the plane I thought was really interesting because it seems like now every time I fly somewhere, the skies are not friendly. I don't know. Somebody said, fly the friendly skies. They're not very friendly anymore.
That was 30 years ago.
Well, you're right. They've moved on. That won't work.
Those commercials used to be so funny, though, because they're like, fly the friendly skies. And what were some of the other ones?
Keep climbing.
Keep climbing. Then there was it Delta? They just come out with, we'll get you there.
Which is the way it is now. Maybe what they should say is we might get you there. So we're on the plane and we're flying, and so we're due into Nashville at 2:00, and this event starts at 3:00. And I know I've got to rent a car and drive at least 30 minutes. And I thought, there's no way. So I'm letting the people know, look, I'm coming in hot. I don't know if it can be delayed, but I don't know. But here's what's going to happen. But anyway, they did it this way. So we're in Pensacola. We start backing out. We're getting ready to head out. And we're heading toward the main thing. It's not a lot of planes there. So we're fixing to be in the air in just a minute. And all of a sudden, we just stop. And a flight attendant comes running by, heading to the back. And I looked at Lisa. I said, well, that's it. We're not going anywhere. When this happens, you just know commercial flight. And then the pilot comes on. He's like, we're in a taxi situation. It's very dangerous. You shouldn't be, get back in your seat. The pilot from up front. So somebody's called him and said, we got a person running around back here. And so we sat there for another minute or two. Then another flight attendant runs by. And I was like, what in the world? And so everybody's trying to look back, but you can't really see that because they were in the very back of the plane. And it's a big plane. And so we sit there a while, and then we start going. I said, well, I guess they got it worked out. They came back up front. But then we were going back, and I thought, oh, my word. We're going back to the gate. So then he comes on and says, we have a person that needs medical attention. Well, then that changed everything because we went from like some idiot, because it made it sound like you didn't know it was just running around the plane when you got to sit down when you take off, to now we got a medical problem. But everybody was just like, first everybody's kind of like looking around. Then when they said that, everybody just got super quiet. Let's take a break. So one of the things I enjoy on our Unashamed set here in the lair is not only our Unashamed mugs that you see here look pretty good, but what's in it. And that is for us, it's the Murdered Out Black Rifle coffee, which is our exclusive coffee on the set of Unashamed. And what we love about this company is they're veteran-owned. Their CEO and founder, Evan Hafer, he was 7 years in CIA, Special Forces. I mean, these guys were on the ground doing it in some bad places and came up with a way to have some really good coffee. I love one of their lines because they donate a lot of coffee to local heroes in terms of firefighters, law enforcement, first responders, and which is a great program. And it says here they donate coffee to keep the front line caffeinated. Because you're out there, when you're out there dealing with bad stuff day in and day out, you need some caffeination going on. So you can check these guys out. We love them. It's blackriflecoffee.com/Phil. Use the code Phil at the checkout. You're going to get 20% off your purchase for your first coffee club order. So that's blackriflecoffee.com/Phil. Use the code Phil. Get you some good coffee. And so I'm watching people because I'm wondering, well, instantly, Lisa and I looked at each other. We prayed. We started praying for this person, and I didn't.
Were y'all like praying out loud, or
no, just like we just like leaned in together and prayed for this person, and because we're now like I'm thinking, well, I'm gonna miss the event. That's okay, this guy, whatever's going on with this person, I know it's a guy or a girl. Well, then they go back up. They open the door. The cops come on. The paramedics come on. They go to the back, and so I'm thinking, well, this is going to take a while. And it was only about 5 minutes. This little family comes walking out, and the dad, it looked like he had 2 young boys, so he's maybe 40 years old. But he looked kind of frail, so he's probably got something. But he had oxygen on, and he was walking real slow, and they were just kind of helping him. And nobody's saying anything. And his wife is like profusely apologizing to everybody on the plane because, now people are going to be late. But, it's really what I loved about it. I mean, one was I think as believers, instantly we thought we were praying for this family. And I felt so bad for them because then she was embarrassed. You talk about the walk of shame. All these people are going to be late, And yet at the same time, people were not, they were not, nobody said anything. Nobody griped. I was shocked. I expected somebody to say, oh, it was like everybody behaved, which I was super impressed. And then the shocker of shockers was within 30 minutes, we actually took off. We didn't have to get off the plane. We didn't have to, I figured, and we actually made the event. But it told me a couple of things. One is that even people that maybe don't believe in Christ can be decent, because I expected it to be worse. Because there were people like on their phones making changes because, all these people, they're going places. And once you get out of the, once 30 minutes can change everything.
But the airlines have developed such a bad reputation through the coronavirus.
Yeah.
So, it's people are already frustrated to even have to do this.
It is. It's not good. And you can't, the mask, it just puts a lot of pressure.
I've analyzed this because I fly all the time. And, I think they have this power that's almost supernatural. And since they're not supernatural and don't really believe in the supernatural, so it seems, they function as, we're a big deal because we have the ability to fly. And so that's the foundation of this. That's why it's so off. Because every time I've had a bad confrontation at an airport where they're being ridiculous about whatever, I usually get to that. I say, one of these days I will fly without a plane. I want to say that. And they always look, whatever they're doing, when I mention that, they look up. Of course, then they think, this guy's crazy.
Of course.
Which is not necessarily a bad thing. I want them to think, I'm crazy.
Keep an eye on this guy.
Make this happen because I'm a crazy man. I believe I'm flying to heaven. And that's the way it comes.
And you're right,
across.
though, about the way it sort of escalated because of coronavirus, because there was a time when they would kind of bend over backwards to fix a situation. But now, a lot of times they're just like, hey, we'll turn this plane around and they're like much more.
Yeah, it's like the time the guy wouldn't let me off the plane. I told that story. He put his arm up.
He was going to armbar you.
This is America. I've spent my 2 hours on the runway, which is your little law. And to me, I thought of it's leadership. Somewhere in these positions of these leadership positions, they feel like more powerful than they are.
We had a guy a couple of flights ago. Lisa got so mad. I hadn't seen that look in her eyes in a long, long time. He said, he asked what we wanted to drink, and we both said Coke Zero. And so, because that's what we drink. And so
they don't offer that anymore.
They did. They're doing it again now.
Oh, so they're back.
They've changed. So the guy, and we had already been delayed, weather delays and all that. So it's kind of been a hectic night. And he comes back and he has a Coke Zero and a Diet Coke. And he hands Lisa the Diet Coke. And she said, I asked for a Coke Zero. And she said it nicely, and he said, no, you didn't. You asked for a Diet Coke. Well, I mean, so now
what happened to the customer's always right?
Well, exactly. Then he said, but I've got some Coke Zero. So he took the thing away. That's how he said, I've got some. He said, but you said that, but you ordered Diet Coke. As he's walking away, one more time, he's telling her what she ordered. And what killed me was, I looked over at her. The look she had in her eyes, it infuriated her because he called her a liar.
But see, this is leadership. These big companies, because somebody sent me an email, one of the questions the question was, how do you invest in these companies that are not godly? Of course, my initial answer is, if you go down that road, you will not invest in corporate America. Because the thought that comes to my mind there is that quote that says, when the eagles are silent, the parrots begin to jabber. It's Winston Churchill.
That's pretty good. I hadn't heard that.
Because to me, that's the only thing that explains that.
Yeah.
Somewhere the leadership direction is not trickling down to we're catering to people.
I was really shocked that Lisa didn't address him because she's pretty bold. She didn't, and so he brought the Coke Zero back, and he didn't say anything else, and Lisa didn't say anything. She didn't challenge him, and I said, I cannot believe you didn't say something about that because I knew she was mad. And she said, well, the way they are now, and we already been through all this for 3 hours. They may have kicked me off the plane. And she was right. It's such an intense environment now. If you just challenge somebody, even for calling you a liar, they'll kick your butt off the plane, in a heartbeat.
It's a short little phrase, but do unto others as you would have them do to you.
Right.
You say, yeah, that's a big deal. Yeah.
Unless you're flying on an airplane.
It's kind of like, ha, 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 yeah, okay, yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
But there's more to that than meets.
That's true. And I will say, in her defense, by the time we got to the thing, she was nice to him on the way out. She told him to have a nice day. And I thought, well, that was good. She let it go. By the time we got there, she cooled down. But who likes to be called a liar?
It costs nothing to be courteous. And look, I'm not saying in our area too. There's my wife all the time gets on tangents about when she goes to a fast food restaurant, which I don't go, but she does. She's like, I can't believe I'm giving these people my money, and they're just sticking a bag out the window. My wife she's the one grabbing the bag. She's like, you're welcome. I gave you my money.
Somehow that doesn't surprise me.
She can't help it. It's like her one thing that sets her off.
Yep.
She's like, I'm
Be
coming
courteous.
here. You're making money. I'm giving you my service and money. I'm taking time out of my life, and you can't even say thank you. It's just here. No.
And they wonder why I don't frequent towns.
Yeah. Well, there you go.
Because you went
Downs
to
and plains, Phil. We're still
because you went to a town, right?
But to go back to the point, who wrote the letter? That is a tough issue as far as what our role is. But I always go back to Jesus had a reputation that was not good because he hung around tax collectors, which is, look, even today, let's face it, how do you view tax collectors?
Yeah. Not good.
Missy's in Austin, so I'm getting the mail, and I'm just seeing these stacks of letters from the IRS, and I'm like panicking. I'm like, should I open these? What is going on? And the next day, here they come again. And it's like urgent. So I was like, I guess I got to break this thing open. And somebody is not doing their job in my organization. So I opened it up, and look, when I read the first few lines, I thought, we're going to jail. You are in breach, you're in. So I read through there, and I look down at the end, I owe $10. So I thought, oh, well, maybe it's the cumulative effect. So I opened the next one. Oh, no, it's the same letter.
For the
$10. So I opened the next one, and it was like, you've been passed off to the group that executes the you're passed. I thought, this is all over $10? No wonder this country is struggling.
You know what you call that? The efficiency of the federal government.
Yeah.
You have more than $10 worth in your stack.
Yeah.
Hang on, let's take a break.
These two branches need to get together. And look, they're sending this out every day.
Yeah.
One of them is saying you owe $10, and the other one says you've been turned over to collections. So I finally took a picture of the letter and sent it to Missy, and I said, they're coming to get us. I don't know how to pay the $10, right. But evidently, if we don't pay this $10, we're going to jail. So, but what I was going to say is Jesus had a bad reputation, and I feel like if you work hard, and I mean in a worldly, where's the verse that says we're in the world but not of the world?
First John.
Yeah. I just think that's, the way we should view it. And you're taking money, especially from an investing company. Okay, so they are corrupt. And you invest in that business. You're not approving of that business. You're trying to make some money.
Right.
You're taking the money that they're getting and you're putting it to a way more noble venture. And you got to remember, making money in the grand scheme of things is way down on the list of priorities. It sure is not going to, get you to heaven. But I feel the same way as about any kind of service you provide as a worker. I mean, you're not, let's say you're into lawn care. You're not going to interview the people that you're mowing their grass and say, now, how do you feel about, and you pick out the top 10 issues.
Right.
But we're fine with that. But then we jump over to a stock or whatever, and we say, oh, well, I can't support them. I'm not trying to support them.
Right.
I'm trying to make some money.
Right.
That's the way I feel. I know people disagree with me because we've gotten those letters too, and that's fine. I think it comes down to that question of that situation where the verse, I think it's in Corinthians, where it says everything is permissible, but not everything is beneficial. And then he went into this idea about some people's consciences get affected in different ways. They had food that was cooked as a sacrifice to idols. And so back then they had this big controversy on whether it's a sin to eat that food.
Right.
So you got some bacon here that was meant for an idol, but you don't believe in that idol. And so you're sitting over there looking around like some of our crew saying, yeah, but it's still good bacon.
That's right.
I just want to eat a bacon sandwich. And it's right there and it's free. But some people that bothers, and if that bothers you, well, don't do it.
But you think about it, it was pretty rich and hypocritical for some of those early Jewish brothers, in my opinion, to be this way towards the Gentiles because of this, thing Jase is talking about, because of this practice, when God had opened the floodgates for them too, but they still wouldn't eat stuff either. They were holding on to the food laws like crazy.
Yep.
And even Peter, who got the vision and got the orders that we're good to go, don't worry about that anymore, he still struggled with it. We found out later. Paul had to tap him on the shoulder and say, hey, Peter, you're hanging out with all our old Jewish buddies. I get it. And that Paul understood it, but he had to walk away. But Paul got it, because you remember Jase mentioned in Acts when he shaved his head the one time. He had Timothy circumcised. I mean, he railed in Galatians about adding circumcision to the gospel. But before he took Timothy on the road, he got, teenage boy, he circumcised it. So what I'm saying is Paul understood the idea, all things to all men. And
That's right.
that the gospel is the most important thing, which I think supports your
you don't compromise your character based on your, and even though we're in the world, I mean, I've seen people, and y'all know them, who take this so far where they're like, you got a guy that hadn't had a job in 8 years because he's like, well, I'm just trying to find, a godly environment. And so you're not working, so then, well, what about the passages that say you're supposed to provide for your family?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So to me, it's kind of like that. It's just, God didn't call us to be policemen. That's his job. And, we're in Romans 4, and if you just needed one verse to prove my point, verse 15 of chapter 4 says, because law brings wrath.
Right.
And you say, what? When you read Romans 1, where it says the wrath of God is being revealed, why? Because when you're under law, wrath is coming.
That's it.
That's right.
Because it's not that he's angry. It's just you have done something that is not in the character and will of God.
Right.
And when that happens, there's a separation. Call it wrath, call it separation, because God, if he was going to be the great God that he is, could not give his approval over something that is opposite of his nature.
But if you think about it, Jay, it's the purpose of law, and not just in the biblical law, but any law. I mean, the reason our country was a country founded on laws was that we have a certain way we think people are to live, and things happen, and then somebody says, as a people, we don't want to live like the behavior is the bad, so they make a law only to point out the bad behavior. And we're not going to allow that, is the purpose of the law.
Yep.
And so even in a practical sense, that's the purpose of law, is to highlight bad behavior and say, we're not going to live that way. Unfortunately, when you have flawed people making law, you get some crazy law. I mean, you get some stuff that's insane. And yet you still, if you decide you're going to be a U.S. citizen, look, when I'm on the plane, I don't want to wear the mask, but you know what? They come on the thing and they say, it is federal law.
Yeah,
for you to wear this mask, and if you don't wear it, if you decide you're not going to wear it, you're breaking federal law.
That's why the
I wear the mask.
That's why the rules are very carefully laid out.
That's right.
Love God, love your neighbor.
Right.
But keep it back right there.
That's right.
And because where there's no law, there's no transgression. In other words, if you don't have all the rules you put on yourself, you won't have to worry about it. But they mound up rule after rule after rule, and they're going around feeling guilty when they break a rule that they voluntarily put on themselves,
right?
Not God.
Not God. And let's take another break. And so what makes this so interesting to me, the reason Paul uses Abraham as his illustration, because all of a sudden, remember, we've been talking about this condemnation, no one is righteous. This is what happens. And then all of a sudden he pops Abraham into his letter. And the reason he uses him, because he has 3 or 4 different examples, law is one of them, circumcision is another one, he mentions that one, is because...
which is a form of a law, though.
That's right. Yeah. Well, it was a physical mark that started with Abraham.
Yep.
I mean, the first person that was ever circumcised was him, and then his family. And that was a physical mark, and there were reasons why. But what's interesting is Abraham predated law. I mean, the law of Moses, all that. So that was the whole point, is he was a man of faith, because, and then he even makes the point in here about circumcision. He said, was he faithful before or after he was circumcised? Because the Jews now, all these thousands of years later, they're making a big deal about circumcision. He said it was before.
Yeah. He was the original. The rule is there are no rules.
That's right. Exactly.
That's right.
I mean, how would you like to live in that environment?
Oh yeah, exactly.
Which still they had a need for solutions. You think, oh, well, they were all just living in blissful peace. No, they were warring. It's the same. When you take God out of the equation, you can come up with any kind of system known to man. There's going to be evil, just like Romans 1, trickling down, and death has always been the instrument of we're better than you, or I'm mad and I'll take you out. I mean, That's just the way our society is. That's why it says law brings wrath, or even the lack of it.
That's right.
Is going to bring the same wrath, because you're still breaking things that are against God's way, which is, that's why the other side of this coin is faith is based on a promise, because that promise is saying, I'm going to trust that God is all knowing and all powerful, and he knows what's best for not only a society, but for you.
So I want to talk about that, Jace, because that's a good point. That takes me where I want us to go. So you talk about promise. He uses the word credit, is the word Paul used here, which I wish I had looked up the Greek word of that. But he says, Abraham believed God and it was credited to him as righteousness. It's really interesting, this concept of credit and faith. It's just what you just said. It's a promise. So when you take out credit, you take out a loan.
The credit had to be there because the death of Jesus on a cross to take away the sins of the world, including Abraham.
Right.
He wasn't there yet.
That's right.
So he's accepting what God is telling him by faith, and it's being credited to him till the blood is shed. Then it goes back to get him.
Exactly. You're talking about 4,000 years forward.
That's correct.
So the idea is,
none of them received what was promised, the Hebrew writer said.
That's
but they understood that only be made perfect with us after Jesus.
That's the last
came.
verse of Hebrews 11, which was his point. He had all those guys, and then he's like, none of them received what had been promised. I mean, you had Abraham in the middle of that, which is more fascinating to me, is that he reasoned the resurrection 4,000 years before it happened.
Yeah.
He thought, evidently, this God can raise dead people.
He said, through my offspring, all nations be blessed. Now he says, kill your offspring. He said, I guess he's going to raise him from the dead. But you're talking about faith.
Well, that's what I mean.
Am I not?
well, that's why it culminated. It was so powerful when it came to that. So when I went to Africa a few years ago, first time I was ever there, and I met these businessmen, and so we were talking, and they were there from Ghana. People in Africa, they just travel country to country. It's weird because it's different from our environment. So I said something about, how do you take out a loan to start a business? In America, you don't start a business, you probably don't have the capital up front, so you take out a business loan to start. And they were like, take out a loan? What is that? I was like, like credit. They were like, credit? What is that? And I said, well, and then I explained to them kind of the credit system in America. You take out a loan, you're promising a bank that you're going to pay this money back as you make money in your business, personal, whatever. They were like, people would do they pay it back? And we're like,
well,
some don't. But I said, most people, if they're going to build a success, that's what they have to do if they then keep expanding their business. And they were like, but they were looking at me with such a confused look. I was like, what? People would pay it back? Like, the concept never even occurred to these guys. And these are business guys. So when they build,
they get the money, they figure they got them slick.
Oh, he said they just moved to another country in Africa. It's just be like, we'd never pay anything back.
Yep.
So they build their houses like it takes years because you got to do it. They
got too many countries in one continent.
That's right.
The borders are too, but it's hard to leave the U.S. I mean, a lot of things got to happen. We're surrounded by water. I mean, you go to Canada or Mexico.
Yeah, but most time people are still going to track you down. So, but it intrigued me because I realized they didn't really understand the process of credit. But that really is what he's talking about here, just what we said. Like, it's the promise God made him. So if you go back to Genesis 12, he calls Abraham, he's 75 years old at this point, and he calls him and he says, I want you to go to a country that I'm not going to tell you where it is or how to get there. You're just going to have to trust me that I'll let you know when you're there. And so Abraham, he took his wife and his nephew and a few other people, and they just took off. And then later he tells them, the promised land and where they wound up, which is Canaan. But it was really interesting from the get-go. Abraham shows he was the sort of person who understood, if I believe, then I'm going to understand later what it's all about. So I think that sort of heart is where he is. And really that's
would want that to be the father of your faith.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Because he's a normal human being, made mistakes. I mean,
But the idea they can't understand it is completely acceptable, because it's the same reason people can't accept grace.
That's right.
Now is because they're like, well, but what about the people who won't pay it back? I mean, because it's like you're putting me in a situation where I'm not honest.
Right.
So I think that's why he said in, where was it, 16, he said, therefore the promise comes by faith so that it may be by grace and may be guaranteed. I mean, just think, you got a promise, you got faith, you got grace, and you got a guarantee to all Abraham's offspring, not only to those who are of the law, but also to those who are of the faith of Abraham. He is the father of us all. Which,
by the way, that meant Jew and Gentile.
That's exactly right.
I mean, that's what he meant. Anybody with faith, and Paul says that in Galatians as well. That look, this covers everybody. Faith is what gets you there, and not just because law and circumcision and all these other things.
But I also just wanted to mention this in 17 that he says, Abraham's the father of faith, but then he said, as it is written, I have made you a father of many nations. He is our father in the sight of God. And then, speaking of God, in whom he believed, the God who gives life to the dead and calls things that are not as though they were.
I love that verse.
Oh, I do too.
It's so
you can
good.
like meditate on that and think, what are the implications of that? But it's the promise that's going to trickle down to us. You're like, why are y'all doing this? Why are you talking about this? Why are you making such a big deal about this? It's like, because the God we follow raises the dead.
That's right.
And makes things that the world thinks is the most important thing ever. I mean, law and order of any sort. And he's having a system based on grace.
Yeah.
I mean, if you ever miss the grace of God as a believer in modern day, I don't know how in the world you can read Romans 4:14 through 17 and try to put yourself under some kind of law system that is guaranteed for wrath.
And yet it happens every day. Let's take one last break. I want to read that verse that you alluded to earlier, Dad, because in this conversation, it's right there. Hebrews 11:39. These were all commended for their faith, and that includes Abraham and a lot of other people.
Yep.
Yet none of them received what had been promised. See, that's the credit. God had planned something better for us, meaning in his time, there in Hebrews, so that only together with us would they be made perfect. And that goes forward. So if you imagine a timeline just being a straight line, and there's the cross stuck right in the middle of it, everything went back to Adam, all the way back to everything going forward.
He was operating under credit from God, dies, but he's really not dead.
Right.
His body falls asleep. He leaves his tent and he just waits. So he said, now the event comes, here comes Jesus. I mean, Abraham was thinking, boy, what a ride that was.
And you said it a minute ago, Abraham was not, he was just like any other flawed person. I mean, he's called the father of faithful, which makes him pretty special. But look, when you go back and read Genesis 12 through 22, and by the way, any of you want to do a deeper dive, I suggest you go back and read that because the story is incredible. But he had some slip ups along the way.
Yeah.
I mean, at one point there, it was so many years had gone by that he said, you know what? Sarah came to him and said, why don't you just sleep with my, concubine here, marry her. And she's young. You have a child by her. And he did. Ishmael. And then he thought Ishmael was the one. And then God comes back almost 25 years later, God comes back and says, okay, now you're ready. You and Sarah are going to have a child together. And she laughed and he laughed.
Yeah.
He was like, that's going to be something. I bet this is really going to happen. Then he said an amazing thing. He said, if only Ishmael could live under your blessing. In other words, he was like, God already got a son. He's 13. We just circumcised him. Why can't it be him? But because you've got to believe what I'm telling you. And I told you and Sarah would have a son. I mean, he struggles like anybody. I think we all
remember studying with a person, and they used Abraham as an example of why they didn't believe in God. Because there was like, I mean, this guy's a, sexual, whatever they call him.
Yeah.
And and then he has a kid when he's 100. Oh, and then let's go. This is love. Let's go kill your your child.
That's right.
I mean, they were upset about it. Because
Yeah.
I was sitting there thinking, well, you pompous windbag. We're all flawed.
We're all flawed.
And death is not a problem. He got it figured out, which is a lot more than I can say for you.
That's exactly right.
In that, because if God can't raise the dead, or if we can't come up with a way to do that, we're all screwed.
That is it.
I mean, you can go nirvana and we're just going to become the energy of the Brad Pitt style and just float around as an energetic. But I mean, to me, that would take so much faith that you would have to literally suspend all intellectual capacity.
Yeah.
That's based on nothing other than I don't have a better idea. So maybe we're just energy. I mean, really?
Well, in Jason, verse 18 of 4, another one of my favorite phrases, tells you just what makes Abraham so special. Against all hope,
Yeah, I was fixed to read that.
which, I mean, against all hope, there seems to be hopeless.
Which is representative, though, in our own little worlds.
That's right.
We're all
many times
at
you been there?
a hopeless state where you're like, there's what can I do?
What else can I do?
Yeah.
Against all hope, Abraham, in hope, believed, and so became the father of many nations, just has been said to him. So, it's that going forward is the mindset.
I wanted to read the rest of it. When he got to 19, it says, without weakening in his faith, he faced the fact that his body was as good as dead. They keep saying that.
That's the Hebrew writer said that too.
Since he was about 100 years old. And Sarah's womb was also dead. It wasn't as good as dead. It was dead.
Dead womb.
Yet he did not waver through unbelief regarding the promise of God, which is an incredible statement.
It is.
But was strengthened in his faith and gave glory to God, which is the opposite of what happens in Romans 1, where it says they neither glorified God because we're all in that hopeless state, and they're like, forget God. Why is this bad stuff happening? He didn't do that. Being fully persuaded that God had the power to do what he had promised. And that's where it gets personal. Because really, your decision-making process in life comes down to that. Does God have the power to do what he promised?
That's right.
And if you say yes, then your immediate reaction should be, well, get my head out of the porn site, or, whatever that trickles down to your list of sins. This is why it was credited to him as righteousness.
That's right.
The words, it was credited to him, were written not for him alone, but also for us, to whom God will credit righteousness for us who believe in him who raised Jesus Christ from the dead.
And remember, it's the long game, because from Genesis 12, this starts, he's 75, to Genesis 22, when he's asked to sacrifice Isaac now. You know how long that was? 40 years. That was a 40-year odyssey of believing what God told you to do.
And we get all shook up in 4 minutes.
40 minutes. That's
Why is
right.
this happening?
Why?
I mean, I'm trying to do the right thing. Why is God just cursing me?
We said, my faith will be strong for 40 minutes, but after that, I expect some answers. And it really is, it shows you that the idea that this is a lifetime and a lifestyle, which we're going to get into in chapter 5, of dealing with disappointments and failures and mistakes and law breaking. And I mean, it's just
Like the Marine Corps says, onward ever, backward never, follow the tanks or die. I mean,
Well, we've gone
like
Winston
that. That's
Churchill.
pretty good.
We've gone Winston Churchill,
Marine
the
Corps.
Marine Corps today, but we're trying to figure out.
we didn't retreat. We just had a rapid advance to the back.
That's right.
Yeah.
Because the story grows. And I started out talking about the I Am Second thing we did. That's what I thought about with Phyllis standing up there. I thought, Phyllis is 45 years old, and we've talked about your life, Dad, and what God has done. But the year she was born was the year you committed your life to him, and we never knew about her until 44 years later.
Yep.
So when you trust God,
That's almost like a biblical story.
it is. I mean, it is a biblical story, because it's a modern day version of exactly what we're talking about.
But Al, the way they wrote these letters, in the last thing I'll say, is we go to chapter 5 all the time, not 4 very often, of Romans, And you read that first verse, it means more knowing what this faith was based on,
Exactly.
even through Abraham all the way to Jesus being faithful to the plan and executing it. So you get to verse 1 when it says, therefore.
Yeah.
Therefore, since this is based on the grace of God, it is based on his righteousness, and he is the one that made all the, providing for our problems. It says, we have been justified through faith. We have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ. So no matter what you say or what you're going through, God has figured out a way to bring peace to our lives through his righteousness, his plan, his forgiveness, his grace. And it means more when you understand what it took. And for some of the other people of our past, our faithful fathers,
Yep.
man, what faith to say, let's look out way out into the future and believe that God's got a plan.
Yeah, I call it the chapter 5 to me, I call it the fruit of the faithful, which we'll get into next time. Thanks for listening to the Unashamed podcast. Help us out by rating us on iTunes. And don't miss an episode by subscribing on YouTube, and be sure to click that little bell to get notified about new episodes. And for even more content that you won't get anywhere else, subscribe to Blaze TV at blazetv.com/unashamed.